So Suma, here we are at the end of 8 years of your presidency, 2 terms in the EBRD, running the EBRD. We are doing a socially distanced interview in these strange times that we live in your back garden in Oxford, keeping our distance to really reflect on your time. And I wonder how you see the EBRD's contribution to international development over the past 2 terms in office that you had.
Well, I think it's been very, very distinctive, actually. I make the claim that the EBRD is, in my view, the indispensable multilateral development bank because the agenda has changed. I mean, the external agenda for development has changed. We've moved to sustainable development goals. We know that those can't be delivered without private finance and private sector delivery. Well, what does EBRD do? EBRD does private sector finance and delivery. We're all about getting the private sector motoring in these countries, emerging markets. And so I think during these 8 years, EBRD has come to be more valued because the agenda has changed, but we've also changed with it. We, of course, stay true to our mission and mandate, but our understanding of how we do that and what we're trying to deliver has, I think, also changed fundamentally.
So how do you think, in particular, the bank has changed during those 8 years? I mean, when I look at the bank, for example, one area that immediately comes to mind is the Green Agenda.
Absolutely, and I think it's a very good example. I mean, we were already quite strong in the climate agenda when I joined the bank, but I think we've grown and grown and grown in that area. I mean, to have last year 46% of our investments in the green economy space, way beyond the target we'd set ourselves for 2020, we did that in 2019, just shows how we've grown. I think in the green space, we are really the #1 multilateral development bank, particularly when it comes to private sector financing. But it's not just about green. I think we've also changed in the doing things that people said was not possible with our private sector model. People said, you know, you couldn't really make women in business opportunities work out. You couldn't really do things to bring excluded cohorts like young people into the labour market or these underserved regions. So our gender, our inclusion, our focus on refugees, all of that we've shown can actually be consistent within our business model. I think that's a really, quite a strong example of how EBRD has faced up to the challenges of today, the development challenges of today, and has made this really rather distinctive contribution to trying to solve those and tackle those challenges.
Now, here we are in the middle of a global pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, probably the start of what could be quite a serious economic crisis for many countries where the EBRD operates, many countries of operations. What do you think this all means for international development and the delivery of international development, and what can the EBRD do about that?
Well, I'm absolutely clear that on the bigger stage of international development, that the concerns we already had before the pandemic struck about whether we were on track to achieve the SDGs by 2030 and the climate goals we had set ourselves, I think that was already becoming quite a challenge. I'm now struck that with this pandemic having hit, the economic impacts of which will last for a while, that the challenges got harder and the financing needs are much harder. So that's why I'm very much of the view that there should be a new Addis 2, if you like, a financing for development conference that really tries to answer how are we going to get the quantum of resources, particularly private sector resources, into these countries. Given the indebtedness on the public sector side, it's going to have to be more private sector financing that does that. And that will mean, for institutions like EBRD, I think really looking at our balance sheet and how we can stretch it, because we're not going to be able to ask for another capital increase because of the stretch in government budgets. So can we actually stretch our own balance sheet and do even more, add firepower? And I think that's the first challenge that we're going to. Secondly, actually in terms of substance in those countries, we're going to have to make sure that what is a liquidity crisis right now doesn't turn into an insolvency crisis. And that's why getting liquidity out through our solidarity package has been so important, I think, for our existing clients. But at some point, we're going to have to think about new clients as well, because they're going to need our financing too. And this current way of operating, it's fine with existing clients. The question is, can we make technology work in such a way that we can still deliver for new clients who we don't know yet? That's a big challenge for EBRD and other institutions, I think.
You've mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals there, the need perhaps for another Addis conference to give a boost to delivery in international development. But there is a worry, isn't there, that actually this was slipping, as you point out, even before we came to the coronavirus pandemic, that now governments have got so much on their plate, not just the recipient countries, but actually also the big donor countries, that the delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals may slip way down the agenda.
There's always a risk of that, and we can't deny that. But at the same time, I feel that there are leaders out there who have their eye on 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals, who are not just focused on here and now. I think there are several leaders in Europe, but also in other countries. Jacinda Ardern comes to mind right now as someone who has been a success in tackling the crisis in her own country, but is also saying, look, we've got to think about this globally of how we're going to respond to this crisis. So I am optimistic up to a point that the leadership will be there to actually really tackle this crisis, but it will require banks like the EBRD to push for that very hard with our shareholders, our global shareholders, to push for that leadership going forward.
So, you've brought up the subject of leadership. Again, it's a difficult situation, isn't it? Multilateral international action seems to have weakened over the past 8 years. That multilateral leadership isn't as strong as it was back when you first took office in 2012.
I think there's no doubt that when I came into office in 2012, the strong support, for example, for EBRD to go into the Middle East, into southern and eastern Mediterranean, was because of the leadership we had from our main shareholders, biggest shareholders. The push we had on the COP21 deal, the Addis conference. So I would say from 2012 through to 2016, my first term, there was a strong wind at our backs, helping us, pushing us in the right direction. It's been much harder since then, for sure. Governments have changed. Some of them have changed their views on what multilateral institutions are for, and it's also brought out more clearly the voice of the recipients in these institutions is not as strong as we might have wanted. And they're the ones who can feel the need for change and feel the need for action even more than the richer governments. So yeah, that has meant that I think managements of multilateral institutions, including EBRD, have had to make the case, much more so. The political imperative for doing things has been much less through multilateral institutions. Look, we've been through some periods of like this before. It is not the first time. But just like with Solidarity Package, don't let a liquidity crisis become an insolvency one. Similarly, in international institutions, we, the managements, the leaderships of the institutions, have to keep pushing our shareholders to try and do the right thing, to use multilaterals. In the end, multilaterals are really important, of course, for the smaller countries who are recipients of the support they get. But they're also actually important for setting standards, for bringing the major shareholders together in a common endeavour. And that is something I think we will return to, I'm sure, in the future.
So during your 8 years in office, you thought very hard, obviously, about putting foundations in. All presidents put foundations in for the years that follow. How do you see the EBRD for the next few years and its role in development? What should it be doing?
Well, I think the EBRD, should really be always looking at the next set of challenges. The worst thing any institution can do is wallow in nostalgia and look at the last mountain that it climbed as opposed to the next one it needs to climb. So I think looking forward, looking at what the challenges are, and I believe there are three major challenges, and I hope they'll inform the EBRD's strategy for the next 5 years. I think one is the green agenda that you mentioned earlier. It is the biggest issue of our times, and EBRD has a strong track record in this. So I hope really that we can move ahead with the Green Economy Transition 2.1 approach, which will cover the next 5 years. And we'll have a very strong offer in that area. The second area would be one where we've made a start. I would say with gender and inclusion, we've made a start. But I think we need a stronger focus on equality of opportunity. So much criticism of the market model of globalization has been that it has not really worked for everyone. It's not floated every boat. So I think it's really important for EBRD and other institutions to have a much stronger offer on equality of opportunity as well. And the third area is, something that I knew was coming, but has sort of arrived, which is digital transition, technology, the future of work. look at the way we're having to conduct this interview. We've arrived really at the future earlier than we thought we would. And I think EBRD has to think about the digital challenges and opportunities for our country's operations and what can we do to make those happen and happen well and quickly. So I think those three themes will be there. They're themes which probably cross all institutions, but with our particular private sector mandate, I think we'll have quite a strong offer on all three. But some hard work ahead to grab those opportunities.
Suma, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.